Hello everyone, good to be back after day off. Today is 13th of April, now it's about 9 o'clock in the morning Moscow time, and I have prepared quite a number of news on some major developments, and I hope you will find this update informative and useful. And if so, please click that like button and leave some commentary just about anything. It might help to deal with extremely aggressive algorithms, especially on YouTube. And dear friends, if you are watching this update on YouTube, please consider to join our communities on Rumble, and if you can watch these videos on Rumble, it might be helpful in the long run if a number of views will increase here. So this is my Rumble, by the way. It's name of the channel is the same, Levan Gudadze Opinion. So yeah, that's been said. Also, if you like my work and my programs, please consider to join our communities on Patreon or Boosty, where I have extra content on regular basis, and that will be also great support for my work and this project. Links are on this video in description box and in the pinned comment. That's been said, let's go through some news now. And first of all, TASS news agencies report that two groups of foreign mercenaries were neutralized in the Kharkov region. So two groups of foreign mercenaries from a separate mountain assault brigade of the Ukrainian armed forces have been destroyed in the forest in the Kupiansk direction of the Kharkov region. This was reported to a TASS news agency by Ivan Bigma, head of press service of the Western Group of Forces of the Russian Defense Ministry, Russian militaries. No specifics, these mercenaries were from which country, but one may assume that they were from NATO member states, most likely, although there is a lot of Colombians, by the way, also, according to some reports, that are joining Kiev regime's militaries for money. Recently there was reports that significant number of Colombian mercenaries rebel, actually, because they were not paid, right? Kiev regime was scamming them. And the number of dozens of Colombian mercenaries decided to flee Ukraine, but some of them probably still there, right? These mercenaries, these two units of mercenaries that were neutralized, could be Colombians also, or most likely from NATO member states. Also, interesting news from RIA Novosti that several group of forces entered the vicinity of Garnal settlement in Kursk salient area on the borderline strip, and now heavy clashes are for Garnal taking place. Most likely before end of next week, Garnal will be completely liberated. And according to some reports, about 50% of Aleshny settlement is under Russian control. The second village that is still disputed between their sides in the Kursk salient borderline strip. This is only two settlements that Kiev regime still has its presence in the Kursk region, and maybe today, maybe in upcoming days, we will receive reports that Aleshnya is completely liberated. And as I said many times before, Garnal is going to be last settlement that Kiev regime will have its presence in the Kursk region, and Garnal will be liberated also, I'm quite sure, before end of next week. And when it comes to Kursk salient area, Russian Defense Ministry updated on losses of their enemy side, and we have some numbers here. The total losses of Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk direction amounted to 73,800 servicemen. At this point, this report is from yesterday, and therefore I think during the previous 12 hours more manpower of enemy was destroyed, and therefore this number probably is already 74,000, over 74,000. Also, more than 400 tanks were destroyed, 332 infantry fighting vehicles, and this is mainly, by the way, especially when it comes to infantry fighting vehicles, these are mainly Western made equipment. 302 armored personnel carrier was also destroyed. 2,264 armored combat vehicles like Max Pro, for example. More than 2,600 other types of vehicles that were usually, civilian vehicles that were transformed for military use. 600, more than 600 artillery pieces, 53 multiple launch rocket systems, including 13 HIMARS multi-launch rocket systems. It is noted that Ukrainian armed forces also lost 26 anti-aircraft missile launchers, self-propelled artillery mounter, 10 transport and loading vehicles, 123 electronic warfare stations, 18 counter-battery radars, 10 air defense radars, 57 units of engineering and other equipment, including 23 mine-clearing engineering vehicles, 1 UR-77 mine-clearing unit, 5 bridge-laying vehicles, an engineering recognition vehicle, as well as 15 armored repair and recovery vehicles, and command and staff vehicles. So as you can see, dear friends, numbers are quite impressive and they're quite specific also, which gives me reasoning to say that probably all these losses of the Kiev regime was documented. That's why information is precise, and nowadays no one should be surprised by this, because drones are flying all over the place, and practically every move of their units, every assault, every successful attack is documented. So Russian Defense Ministry most likely has quite precise information about losses of their enemy. Only question mark I have about number of lost military personnel of Kiev regime, because I think Russian Defense Ministry is quite conservative, and the real number of the losses of the Kiev regime is around 100,000, and I'm saying so because Russian Defense Ministry, once again, only reports about enemy casualties when there is a objective control in the place. But as I said there a number of times before, just imagine a situation when several, let's say, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, US-made Bradleys, with their assault groups inside are moving towards some direction, and Russian troops destroy all 3 of them, let's say, right? Russian Defense Ministry will calculate only crew members as a losses on part of enemy side, not their assault groups that were inside, because objectively speaking, you cannot know, are there anybody inside or just the crew members, right? So Russian Defense Ministry will account for just crew members. It's a free in Bradley, isn't it? So therefore, I think most likely real losses of the Kiev regime is around 100,000 at least. That's being said, well, when it comes to losses of the Kiev regime, probably you already read some on some other on some media or hear from some channels that Kiev regime lost yet another F-16 fighter jet, US-made fighter jet. There was a speculation earlier when information became available. Some were assuming that Kiev regime's air defense systems intercepted or shut down basically their own plane, but lately more and more reports are coming in that this was a Russian side who destroyed enemy F-16. Only question is, was it a air defense system or the fighter jet that launched missiles? We don't have precise information on that. Maybe Defense Ministry will clear their picture today about this successful strike on enemy fighter. This is a 3rd or 4th F-16 that was destroyed in air, if I remember correctly. One was definitely intercepted by Kiev regime's air defense systems earlier. That was the first F-16 that they lost, and the rest was neutralized by Russian air defense systems and their air forces. Previous reports about F-16 being intercepted was a couple of weeks ago, isn't it, in the Sumy region, and this F-16 was also intercepted in the Sumy region. Pilot of F-16 didn't manage to escape, so Kiev regime lost pilot also. RT, meanwhile, is reporting that Trump's Kiev envoy clarifies proposed zone of responsibility in Ukraine. There was a kind of tsunami of outrage in Kiev-controlled territory in the West, especially in globalist-controlled Europe, when Kellogg, according to Times, come up with the idea of dividing Ukraine, and he actually clarified his stance on the situation, and he said that Times actually misrepresented his position. Let's go through this news here. U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, General Kat Kellogg, has rejected the notion that he proposed dividing Ukraine like post-World War II Germany, accusing the Times of misrepresenting his remarks about the Cold War-style post-ceasefire security arrangements. Kellogg told the Times in an interview published on Friday that British and French, but not American troops, could lead the Western military force positioned west of the Dnieper River, while Ukrainian forces would hold the territory further east. He also suggested establishing a demilitarized zone roughly 18 miles wide along the current lines of control to prevent direct clashes with Russian forces. You could almost make it look like what happened with Berlin after World War II, when you had a Russian zone, French zone, and the British zone, US zone, said Kellogg, a retired US Army Lieutenant General who was appointed by Trump to deal directly with Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky. Kellogg acknowledged that the Kremlin might not accept the proposed zones of control, and claimed that DMZ would create conditions for sustainable ceasefire and would not be provocative at all to Moscow. The British newspaper ran its story with the headline, Trump envoy, we can divide Ukraine like post-war Berlin, prompting Kellogg's to accuse the publication of taking his words out of context. The Times article misrepresented what I said. Kellogg wrote on X on Friday, I was speaking of a post-ceasefire resilience force in support of Ukraine's sovereignty. In discussions of partitioning, I was referring areas of zones of responsibility for an allied force without US troops. I was not referring to a partitioning of Ukraine. Anyways, by the way, this interview of Kellogg did make some headlines worldwide, and understandably so. Comments were made here in Russia, and obviously Russian side says, no, this is nonsense, it's not happening. No NATO troops on Kiev-controlled territory, at least outside of Western Ukraine, because I'm 100% convinced, by the way, once this conflict will end, Ukraine will eventually undergo full-scale disintegration. Western Ukraine will end up under control of NATO, because most likely it will be reclaimed by Poland, Hungary, Romania, maybe Slovakia. All these countries are NATO member states, right? So therefore, Western Ukraine, most likely, one way or another, but will be under NATO control. But rest of the Ukraine is out of question. On rest of the territory, there will be no NATO troops. It's just impossible. Moscow will never agree on that, right? And definitely, Moscow will never agree on the presence of NATO troops on the Dnieper River, by the way. This is nonsense, because just take a look at the map. Nikolaev region and Odessa region are west of Dnieper River, right? And how anybody can imagine that Russia will allow Odessa, this historically Russian city, to be controlled by enemies of Russia? It's just not happening, by the way. It's total nonsense. So therefore, I mean, this is Dnieper River, by the way, here, right? This is Dnieper River, and this is Nikolaev, and this is Odessa. And of course, both these cities and their regions will be liberated from Western-backed terrorist regime of Zelensky. I have no doubts about that. As other regions of the so-called Ukraine Kharkov region, Dnipropetrovsk region will be also liberated, and I believe it is a possibility that Russia don't have to conduct military operations to liberate all these areas. What might happen is that if sometime in the future agreement on the escalation really will be reached between Moscow and US and other US allies from this anti-Russian coalition, UK, France, Germany, and rest, then agreement may be that the Kiev regime is withdrawing forces from DPR, LPR, Kherson and Zaporozhye regions. Ceasefire is put in place, right? And then under the UN, under the United Nations, referendums are taking place all over the so-called Ukraine, whatever is left of it, right? Including in Nikolaev, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov regions, right? And everybody who lives there in these regions are from there, by the way, because many residents of these regions, by the way, are living now in Russia. I know personally people that are from Kharkov, for example, and they cannot wait until Russian forces will liberate this city. They won't go back to their home, right? So everybody who is from these regions, and it's all documented, isn't it? You have a passport, you have some other IDs, and it's clear that you're actually from this region or that region, right? So it's not going to be that difficult to organize referendums and let local people decide fate for themselves, decide for their own future, for the future of their kids, right? And for the region. And I'm 100% convinced, by the way, that most likely people from Odessa region, from Nikolaev region, from Dnipropetrovsk region, Kharkov region, potentially from Poltava region, Sumy and Chernigov regions, some others, they will probably vote to get rid of this nonsensical Ukraine and to join Russia. And if so, their opinion should be respected, right? So that's why I'm saying one way or another, directly or indirectly, but from Kharkov to Odessa, all territories will be liberated from this Western-backed terrorist regime of Zelensky, and Kiev will be liberated also. Although I'm not saying that I don't see, although it is also a possibility that Russia will agree to maintain statehood for Ukraine. So Kiev and the few surrounding regions may stay on the map as a Ukraine, only in Russian zone of influence. Only in Russian zone of influence. Rest, I mean, Western Ukraine, Western parts of Ukraine will be controlled by NATO one way or another, and I don't think Moscow will have much issue with that, because I remind the difference that Western Ukraine is a birthplace of the Ukrainian fascist Nazism and the terrorism. And you know what? Let Western countries, let NATO deal now with those extremist elements that NATO was financing and training. So Western Ukraine, we don't care, right? But rest is definitely either will join Russia, or if maintains statehood as a Ukraine, will be in the Russian zone of influence, 100%, and no NATO troops will be stationed there. It's just impossible, completely impossible, right? So it will be better if Trump's envoys or Trump himself or whomever is working on the topic of Ukrainian crisis in the West, in US, in UK, in France. It would be better if they will realize what is going on and stop playing the games, because the longer this conflict continues, more and more weaker position of the collective West is on the world stage. That's it, right? And I don't know how long they're gonna ignore this objective reality, how long they're gonna ignore that they lost this proxy war against Russia. But one day they will be forced to face the reality, and that day is coming back. RT is also reporting that US wants control over their key gas pipeline in Ukraine. So the administration of US President Donald Trump wants Kiev to give Washington control of the pipeline through which Russian gas was reaching European Union. According to Reuters, the request is one of the Easter eggs contained in the latest draft of the minerals deal that Washington is pressuring the government of Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky to sign, the agency claimed in an article on Friday. So seems like Washington wants to grab just about everything on Kiev-controlled territory, at least had their paperwork that will allow them to have some say when these territories will end up under Russian control, direct or indirect. But I mean, Trump is mistaken. Trump and his team definitely are mistaken. Zelensky is illegit, right? And anything that Zelensky signs up for has no legitimacy. Anything that Zelensky will sign up for has no legitimacy. Not for Russia, anyways, right? And therefore, once these territories will be under Russian control, US can have nothing there. No claim on anything at all. And Trump should realize that until now. You see, some time ago, Trump reacted quite harshly on the Russian president's statements about illegitimacy of Zelensky. And we know why. Because Trump is pushing Zelensky to sign up for these papers so that US will have some claims then, once Russia will take over their area. But, and he wants Zelensky to be acknowledged as a legit for this reason, but it's not happening. In no circumstances, Moscow will acknowledge Zelensky as a legit leader, because he is not. He is just simply not, right? According to Ukraine's constitution, during the martial law, presidential mandate is not prolonged. Only mandate of the Rada, which is a parliament, is prolonged, not the president's one. So therefore, Zelensky is illegitimate according to constitution of the so-called Ukraine. But anyways, it's really bad optics way that US is behaving nowadays, when they literally want to rob just about everybody and just grab everything, including on Kiev-controlled territory, temporarily controlled by the Zelensky's regime. It's just bad optics, by the way. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, US leadership should care little more about the image of the US, which is already destroyed big time, right? And almost no one has any respect for US in this world, exactly because of these crazy policies of the Washington, and Trump is making this already bad image of US even worse. It's wrong, it's a mistake, but anyways, we have also interesting report from Neonosti that Trump extends a state of emergency in US, and you guessed who they blame for that? Russia, of course, Russia. So US President Donald Trump has extended the state of emergency in the country for a year under the pretext of Russia's allegedly harmful foreign policy actions, according to the text of the document signed by the head of the state. So okay, by the way, many US citizens probably don't even know that they are living under emergency situation, which is justified by these psychopaths in Washington by some actions of Russia. And remind me if you can, when Russia attacked US. I mean, when it happened, ever. If I remember correctly, Russia never attacked US, right? But anyways, Tass News Agency is reporting that another Trump's envoy, by the way, as you know, Witkov, was here in Russia on Friday. And unfortunately, Russian President Vladimir Putin wasted his time to meet with this nobody, Steve Witkov. And then this nobody went to Oman, where he had a meeting with the foreign minister, indirect talks, negotiations took place there in Oman between Witkoff and his team, I guess, and representatives of Iran, including Iran's foreign minister, Arakchi was there. And Witkoff and Arakchi actually met, according to some reports, for a couple of minutes, face-to-face, exchange just greetings, I guess. But negotiations were conducted indirectly. Oman's foreign ministry was a mediator. Oman's representatives and well, before Witkoff went to Oman, he was here in Russia, as I already said. On Friday, he had a meeting with Dmitriev, his counterpart, Russian president's special envoy, on economical stuff and financial stuff and so on. But still, Dmitriev, when Dmitriev was in US president did not greet him. Publicly, at least, you know, when I criticize Russian government for paying too much attention to this nobody, Witkoff, some members, at least one member of our community, write in the comment section that maybe Trump greeted Dmitriev, but it was just not public, right? Information was not shared with the public. And yes, theoretically speaking, I mean, we don't know, maybe, but it does not change nothing, right? Because Russian president met Witkoff first time, and it was a public knowledge, and Russian president met Witkoff now also on Friday, and this is also publicly done, and therefore, if US president met with Dmitriev, he should do it publicly too. But I guess he did not met him, and you know, I think Russian president actually made a big mistake while meeting with this nobody and wasting his time. And by the way, you know, Western propaganda, they say that if you are in Russia and you criticize government for anything, and if you say something that goes against official policies, you're gonna get jailed and you're gonna get killed and this and that. No, I am a demonstration that this is a propaganda, pure propaganda and freaking lie, right? Because I'm right now openly saying that Russian president made a critical error, mistake, in my personal opinion, when he spent time, waste his time, while talking to this nobody, Steve Witkoff, representative of Trump or whatever. It was a mistake, by the way. Right? I'm 100% convinced on that. And what come out from that meeting? Any results? Of course, no. That's the result, by the way. Trump extends state of emergency and blames Russia for that. And also Trump prolonged for another year anti-Russian sanctions. That's the reaction from Washington, by the way. So therefore, I'm 100% convinced, by the way, that it's counterproductive when Russia is acting too diplomatically. I can understand that Russian president is a top high-level diplomat and he is just demonstrating goodwill, really, right, by meeting with Witkoff and so on. Russian foreign minister was quite polite also in his statements that Washington and the current administration interested in de-escalation, but there are some obstacles that are created by other countries in the West, which might be true, but actions matter, isn't it? And that's the actions, by the way. US prolongs emergency and blames Russia for that, state of emergency, and US prolonged for another year anti-Russian sanctions. Same time, US continues to support Kiev regime financially, militarily, with intelligence, right? And so where is the de-escalation? What are actual steps we have on the ground from US that tells us that that they are for the escalation? Just the rhetoric, by the way, just the talk is cheap, right? So therefore, until US stops any weapons and munition supplies to Kiev regime, intelligence sharing with their Kiev regime, intelligence sharing with their other NATO member states that are actively engaged in this proxy war against Russia, namely basically all the NATO member states, right? With the exception of two, Hungary and Slovakia. Until this is done by US, Russian leadership should, should stay diplomatic, of course, be diplomatic and polite and everything, but should not waste time meeting with these nobodies from US, right? It's counterproductive, and it's bad optics, by the way. It's just simply bad optics, because many people worldwide gonna say, I mean, why Putin is meeting with this guy when Dmitriev was not greeted by US president? And after all, US still continues to send weapons and munition and intelligence to the regime so that more Russians will be killed. And from where, in this situation, when US is directly involved in the death of Russian citizens, in this situation, to be too polite towards US administration, it just makes no sense whatsoever. But again, in my personal opinion, by the way, but Kremlin clearly thinks otherwise. And I think it is a mistake, but anyways, TASS news agency is reporting that Trump spoke about these negotiations, indirect negotiations that happened in Oman between US and Iran, and he said that talks were going well. So negotiations between Washington and Tehran are progressing well. This was stated by the US President Donald Trump during a conversation with the journalists from White House press pool on board of his plane. Okay, good if Washington thinks that it's a positive stuff happening during these talks, because after all, Iran has no nuclear weapons and Iran has no plans to build nuclear weapons, right? And therefore, all this crazy talk from Washington towards Iran and all these threats from Trump that US gonna bomb Iran and that kind of stuff was clearly a provocation. And I don't know, maybe forces that are behind the Trump's administration are realizing that if they go against Iran militarily, I mean, that will maybe beginning of the end of US. They are not in a position to defeat Iran, man. No way. It's just impossible. It's just not happening that way, right? So therefore, if Washington is changing tune now, it's a good stuff. It's a good sign. So let's hope it will stay this way. And negotiations between Tehran and Washington gonna continue, I believe, in a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks time. There will be next tour of negotiations, and well, it's good, by the way. It's good if Washington will stop acting as if they are like directors of this world. They are not. They are just one country that barely manages to take care of itself, or not even manages that. Take a look at the New York, by the way, some shithole, right? I mean, clearly, New York is a shithole that you might struggle to find in some third world countries. That's how bad situation is there. Take a look at the California, by the way, once greatest state of US. It's a shithole, right? Total bling. And country that has so many issues, by the way, so many problems, and barely manages to take care of itself, is pretending to be world's, I don't know, director or boss of this world. No, it's not like that. So US should just really stay out of geopolitics and focus more on itself before it exists, because it will not take long, by the way. Process of collapse of US as an empire is it's in decades now, right? This fail of US is happening for decades and decades and decades, from late 90s, one may argue, right? And the final collapse might happen very fast. Final collapse might happen like that. And US is getting closer and closer to that point. And if US leadership continues to act this crazy, okay, I mean, they're gonna just fast track the final end, right? RIA Novosti is reporting that China, meanwhile, is increasing additional tariffs on US goods up to 125%. This is retaliatory step from China because US is increasing tariffs on China. It's now either 125 or 145, by the way, because I believe US president add more tariffs on China, and then China will, of course, do the same. And in those circumstances, US gonna defeat China, by the way, in this tariff wars. It's just not happening, and they should start talking with China. They should start talking with China until it's too late, because well, when stocks in US will finish stockpiles of all sorts of goods in warehouses, right? When that is done, then additional imports from China gonna cost US taxpayers twice more, right? In some cases, 3 times more, and that's gonna be inflation like US has never seen, really, maybe since the Great Depression. Anyways, Glad newspaper is reporting that EU and China to hold a Beijing summit to discuss US tariffs. So yes, I mean, US is definitely not in a great place right now, because countries worldwide that not necessarily are allies becoming situational allies right now to somehow counter their aggressive steps of the US, and this information just confirms that, right? I mean, EU and China themselves have quite issues in a trade, right? But still they are gonna get together and discuss how they're gonna deal with this aggressive trade politics policies of the US. It's not gonna end well for EU, by the way. China can withstand US pressure, but EU, no, man. EU is done, right? EU is finished, by the way. That's for sure. And this is it for now. How long is this update? Relatively short update. Hopefully you will find it informative, interesting, and useful. And if so, please click that like button, leave some commentary just about anything, and share information about my channel with your friends in real life or online. And if you like my work, if you like my channel, so please consider to support. You can do it with donation through PayPal or Boosty platforms, or by subscribing to my page on Patreon and Boosty. All the links are on this video in the description box and in the pinned comment, including crypto address of the crypto wallet. And yes, dear friends, if you are not subscribed to my Rumble channel, please consider to subscribe if you are watching on YouTube, and whenever you can, please watch videos on Rumble. Yet again, I mean, if view numbers on Rumble will reach same level as it is on YouTube now, it might actually become more or less serious help for a project to survive. So it does matters. So yes, this is it for now, dear friends. Thank you very much for your time, for your attention. Have a wonderful day, and take care.